ทรมานเขานิดนึงให้เขาพูดต่อเลยนะฮะเรื่องที่ประเทศอื่นเนี่ยจะสลับคนอื่นมาพูดก่อนแต่ว่าผมคิดว่าน่าจะต่อเนื่องไปเลยเขาจะได้เผื่อมีคำถามอะไรที่ค้างจากคราวที่แล้วเนี่ยจะได้คุยต่อเนื่องได้นะครับก็ทางดร.เลนเขาก็จะพูดในเรื่องของ sustainability ก็เอาผมว่าให้แกคุยเลยแล้วกันนะครับโอเค
All right.
Thank you.
So is this microphone just for the, okay. Just wondering if I was supposed to be hearing it through the speakers or not. So again, I want to talk a little bit about feed management, but also sustainability. To me, this is very pretty. I'm from the desert, so this is Arizona, and Mexico is a lot of desert like this. But this is a very large shrimp farm in Mexico. This is also in Mexico, so it's the same. You know, I work across a number of different countries. I work across a number of different technologies. A lot of the examples that I'll show you are because I support my industry, so our densities are at our industry. But we work, you know, with groups that are doing these super intensive systems as well. So I think the things that I'll talk about apply across these different systems. And we've already talked about, you know, in terms of sustainability, so usually I do this talk independent. But to me, you know, aquaculture, we really should be promoting ourselves for a lot of different reasons. We are, you know, one of the more efficient producers of protein. Now, we're not, in terms of protein to protein conversion, we're not any better than poultry, okay? I put us, actually in my slides, I put us a little above poultry. But the reality is, I mean, I view us as equivalents. But where we, you know, can and we do exceed other terrestrial animal production systems is protein per unit of energy that we produce. And we're far more efficient because we're dealing with poikiothermic animals. So to me, you know, our use of protein and our conversion of energy was our main advantages. And then we also, in terms of animal production, we have a relatively low use of water, or we can have a very wasteful use of water, or we can have a relatively low use of water. And a lot of our crops, especially in the marine system, you're not competing with freshwater resource because you're in a marine system. So to me, those are advantages. And then we also have multi-trophic systems. These are all things that we can promote as advantages. But we also have, you know, things that are disadvantages. So, you know, from the conversion of a low-quality feed ingredient to a high-quality product, I think we do that very well. You know, in terms of production of carp, tilapia, shrimp. But our use of fish meal is to me the biggest issue. And jokingly, you know, you don't see a shrimp going out and eating a fish. That's our perception of what we need in our feed formulations. We created that. The shrimp did not create that. And so you've already heard me going on for an hour and a half about this, so you don't need any more. We've already talked about this, so I'm just going to go through it. But to me, sustainability is using these expandable ingredients. So if you want to say that poultry byproduct meal through expansion of poultry industry, that's expandable, so that's reasonable to do. But we need things that we can expand. And our marine ingredients, we can't expand. So that's the reason I think we need to look at agricultural-based ingredients. And we've already talked about that. So I'm just going to skip through. And as I said, we've done lots of work. We've already shown this, so we're not going to talk about it. I meant to hide those. But, you know, I'll give you some other examples. And again, just going back to, as I said, I like, you know, this corn soy based, so I use a lot of examples of that because I think it balances things out. So this is an example of another product that's on the market. It's a high protein distiller's grain soluble. So again, they're changing their processing. But we ran a low fish meal diet. So here's, you know, 6% fish meal. We're coming and replacing corn protein concentrate. So what we're doing is basically, this is a corn product, this is a corn product, so it's a much better direct comparison than taking fish meal and replacing it with something else. But of course, you guys want to see it compared to fish meal, so we can also take fish meal and do that comparison and do that replacement with fish meal. You know, to me, this first comparison is the better comparison because you don't change so many things nutritionally. This, you change a lot of different stuff. But if you run those through, and we've done aquarium trials, outdoor tank trials, again, you know, you see very good feed conversions. You get plenty of weight gain, survivals, you know, good size differences in terms of growth and whatnot, and there's no real differences. Again, we can take the fish meal out and use a lot of different ingredients as replacements. This is just another example. And just showing that data across, corn protein concentrate versus distillers, high protein distillers grains versus this. So again, these are, basically low fish meal diets. Lots of different ways to skin that cat. Everybody says you can't use, soy-based diets or low fish meal diets in high-density systems. So just to, point that out, we've done, this is a soy-based diet, so there's 50-some%. We ran it against different densities, and yeah, as you increase density, this is pond data, you're going to change your growth rates, but you get very good performance. If you do this in outdoor tanks, so we went in this case up to 65 shrimp per meter, our growth is fine. But you do, as you increase density, you decrease growth rates. That's accepted. Now, from a nutritional standpoint, there's some things you can do to try and bring that back. And a lot of people say, well, I'm running at high density, therefore I need more animal protein or no fish meal. So we've started to move to some examples of higher density systems. We've just started doing this. As I said, I work with a lot of producers that are at higher densities. This is not as high as you run here in Asia, but for a lab study, it's pretty good density. So we ran at 120 per meter. Again, looking at, your argument that fish meal, bringing it down to 0. Again, using soy-based diet. So these are both soy proteins and then some corn protein concentrate there. I'm bringing that down. So this is outdoor tank experiment. And in terms of weight gain, we get fine weight gain, get fine survivals. A little bit difference in terms of feed conversions, but again, going from 0 fish meal all the way to a high fish meal diet at 125 per meter, which is pretty good density in outdoor systems, we can demonstrate that. So to me, there are differences as you go to high density, do not get me wrong, but I think that the same things that we do at lower densities are very much applicable to these high density systems. Other things that people are interested in, and as I said, this is again another example. We can't expand fisheries, but through aquaculture we produce byproducts. So we have a lot of byproducts from processing that are now being marketed as fish meal. So you have, for example, in the tuna industry, which is a wild fishery, you can have tuna byproduct meal going as a quote-unquote fish meal. Well, salmon industry produces a lot of byproduct. The catfish industry produces a lot of byproduct. If you're producing a fillet, you have byproducts you produce. And so we've started looking at them because, again, if you want fish meal, at least this is more sustainable. I mean, you can argue that this is not from the wild. You can make those arguments. So we've looked at some of these in the lab just as replacements. I mean, essentially they're fish meal being replaced for fish meal. So protein digestibility, energy digestibility for menhaden fish meal, anchovy meal, salmon meal. And then this is a hydrolyzed salmon meal. So these are both byproducts from the salmon industry as examples. And they have good digestibilities, good energy digestibilities or protein digestibilities. Now, of course, the hydrolyzed meal is going to show is higher. So we've done replacements where, again, taking a high anchovy meal-based diet, replacing it with salmon meal. Now, this level of hydrolysate is not what I would recommend, but what we wanted to do is look at the hydrolysate as a protein source. This is too high a level in reality. But you can see going from 20%, straight replacement, you get no differences across, that replacement right here, or even maybe a little bit benefit. But when you go to those high levels of hydrolysates, you do have problems. And this is just because we're using a water-soluble, low molecular weight protein as a protein source. And you can't do it at these high levels, okay? The big disadvantage of hydrolysates is there is an upper limit. It's around 5%. And so you can only use them as attractants, as sources of dipeptides and things like that, but you're not going to use them as protein sources. And that's what we were trying to demonstrate to these guys, that it can't be used as a protein source. So that makes sense. So again, there's lots of these byproducts out there, and they are good things. One of the things that I like about the hydrolysates, they're also acidifying things, and so part of their advantage is that. And if you need something, if you're looking for the dipeptides or something, or possibly as a potential attractant, I think they're reasonable to have in there. But there's limits. 5% is that limit. So as I said, we work a lot with sustainable feeds, and I can give you the best quality feed in the world, but if you don't apply it properly, it's completely wasted, right? and I don't know what the best way to apply feed is. Maybe using a bottle is the best way, I don't know. But we do a lot of work at looking at feed management. And to me, the biggest issue with most commercial farms is they don't spend a lot of time looking at feed management. In Asia, you have a tendency to be very good feed managers. That's a very good compliment to Asia. Latin America, I hate to say it, they tend to be very poor feed managers. So you guys are doing a good job at that. But I spend a lot of my time trying to evaluate and question what are we doing and can we improve it, okay? Because this is a big part of our cost, and if we don't apply it properly, we don't get the best results. And so I do a lot of talking in terms of feed management and choices. And there's no right answers. There's lots of different ways to do this. You know, feed trays are very popular. Some people have used feed trays as 100% of the ration. Some people use feed trays as a monitoring tool. Or you can do broadcast spreading. There's lots of different ways to do feed management. But there's key things in terms of when you deal with feed management. One of the big issues with shrimp is that as you leave feed in the water, performance is going to go down, okay? And so there's not a whole lot of data. As far as I know, we're the only ones who've done this. We took a commercial feed and we put it in the water, and then we took it back out of the water, we dried it, we quantified it, and then we used it as a feed, okay? We thought about doing this for a long time, and it was like, well, I don't want to leach it for so amount of time. And finally, we decided, well, we'll just leach it. So we took a whole bunch of feed, leached it for different time intervals, then we re-dried it, and then we used that as our food source. And, within, less than 60 minutes, there's good performance. But as soon as, we got to 60 minutes of leaching time on down, we had a decrease in performance. And we talk about this all the time, and it's I complain to the shrimp industry that they want 24-hour stability, right? You want to see your feed 24 hours down the road. Well, that's a good management tool, but it's worthless in terms of a food source, okay? And I apologize for my examples, but if you guys eat cereal, right? You make cereal in the morning. You put your milk on your cereal and you eat it right away. You don't let it sit there for an hour and then come back to it, and I say it's a soggy cereal effect. You're not going to eat it. Well, the shrimp probably doesn't like it any better. And so this concept that we've promoted of having feed in the water for extended periods of time, to me, is a very bad thing, that we need to get away from that. Number one, we've got data that shows that the performance is not going there. So if you look at all these ways of different feed management, there's no right answer. To me, record keeping is critical. That you got to have good numbers. A lot of times our farmers, basically lie to themselves. The hatchery will sell you 1 million PLs. Well, it's 1 million plus 10% or 20%. What number did you use when you calculated your survival? Did you actually calculate how many animals you put in the pond, or did you take 1 million as the number? It might be 1 million and 100,000. So having quality records and looking at those records to me is very, very important. And all the guys that are good feed managers, there is no one method that works. If you talk to them, they use multiple methods. They might use feed trays. They use, feed curves. They use lots of different things to make that decision. The problem I have is that all of these things that we've been doing are post-responsive. Okay, they're after the fact. And so the best way that I can describe that is, if you're going to go, guy dies, then he goes to the doctor. It doesn't make sense, right? He's dead. Why is he going to the doctor? You want real-time management. When you're sick, you want to go to the doctor, all right? You want to diagnose what's going on in real time. And that's a little bit harder. If you don't know what you're doing, if I'm going to make hamburgers as a living, and I don't have any feedback from the people who I'm selling to, maybe I'm going to make a hamburger that big. Or maybe I'm going to make a hamburger that big. If no one tells me what I need to do, how can I do it properly, right? And the problem we have with shrimp is that they really don't tell us what they want to do. It's all post-responsive. If you look at the things that, have occurred in fish, we got lots of different techniques and lots of different technologies. The salmon industry has some incredible things that they do. but they have an ability to actually visualize, right? You know, the fish are coming up to the surface. They're working in clear water systems, so they can have cameras. They can have sonars. They can have lots of different ways where in real time they can measure things. The reality is, you know, in the modern salmon industry, you know, there's nobody there. This guy's sitting in an office somewhere with his feet kicked up, drinking coffee, watching a bunch of video monitors. He's controlling everything electronically. There's nobody out there. It's all electronic. They're using visual systems. They're using sonar systems to manage the fish, the size of the fish. I mean, they even have lasers now that will shoot parasites off fish. It's pretty amazing. If you look at, you know, think about, you know, fish. We saw a great video. Let me turn this down. You know, that's pretty easy to figure out that those fish are consuming, you know, that they're hungry, right? With fish, we see exactly what's going on. We can see the response. We can measure the response. You know, floating feed is a good management tool because we have, you know, feedback right there and then. It's not post-responsive. You know, if you look at what happens in a fish pond or a shrimp pond, you know, I don't see any shrimp coming up to eat that feed. I mean, that's, you know, I got a bird. You know, this happened to be a pond that we had that was clear. So we decided to drop a GoCam in it, threw some feed in there and drop it in there just to see the shrimp coming and grabbing that food. But you can't, you know, shrimp ponds are not clear. You know, this was an anomaly. It just happened to be very clear. So you see them all come in and get that feed. You know, if you look at shrimp and how they consume feed, they're really messy eaters. They go up there and they grab that feed. They grab 5 or 6 pellets and then they drop them. And they'll pick up a couple more pellets, right? You know, they're externally masticating that feed. You can even see that feed coming up through the shrimp. It can go, you can see it go right through there. They're actually very interesting animals from nutrition and processing. But they're very messy eaters, right? We don't want that feed sitting there for an hour losing its quality. We want to be able to deliver that feed to them. And so, you know, there's some interesting data out there. This was one of the only studies, or one of the few studies out there that I know of that actually looked at feed management. This was out of Asia, looking at automatic feeders, and they got very good results. Well, we happened to be tied up and met some of these guys when they actually were starting to do the recordings for the AQ1 system. They came to our facility, and you know, we saw what they did and we heard what went on in the industry, and so I decided we needed to start looking at the automatic feeding systems at our facility to see what they would do. And so we brought in the AQ1 system, and let me see if I can get this to run. Let's see, I got to get the mouse over. There we go. There we go. Oh, it is running. All right, let me get the volume up. Okay, is that coming out? Oh, we forgot to plug in. Okay, hang on. Technical difficulties. Well, why did... You could hear... Can you hear that? Is it coming through there? Okay. It's going through the HDMI. It actually... Okay. We fought with it for about a half an hour this morning. Now it's working. So, okay. So let me hit that. Let me see if I can make that run again. All right. So what I want you to listen to, get it to go. All right. So what you'll hear is the background noise, and then you're going to hear this. That's somebody throwing feed into the water. Ah, come on. Well, let me go back. Can you hear that? Can you hear that noise go up? All right. Ah. Hang on. Unfortunately, I think I got one of my slide got hidden. Do. All right. This was my top secret slide, sorry. All right, so, okay, now what are we doing? Thank you. All right, so I've used this demonstration to try and explain how this works, and we'll see if you guys are smart enough to do this. I have bad examples. All right? So I got candy. So the way this works is the AQ1 basically takes and does a test. Okay? It'll throw a little bit of food. So you guys got to keep your heads up. And it's going to listen then for a response. And so the question is, are you guys smart enough to figure out how to get more candy? How do you get more candy? Can you guys clap? Yes? No? So if I, there. Up to Ramesh in the back. Is back there. Oh. Okay, so there you go. See? So you guys want you got to clap. All right? If you can clap. Oh. Okay, this is dangerous. So be careful. No, you guys aren't clapping. You don't get anything. No. Laughing doesn't count. You have to clap. You have to clap. Okay, so you make noise, you get fed. It's simple. Okay, you guys. Hey, here you go. He's gonna clap. Oh, ladies back here clapping. All right. She caught two at the same time. Sean. Okay, here. This will make for good photography. Ready? And at the camera. Okay. Who didn't get candy? Okay, you guys got to pick up the candy. The real example of this would be when you open it up that you hear the noise. Okay, that's really the example. So the last group I talked to, I've done this, I don't know how many places. They wouldn't clap. You guys, I don't understand. You don't like my candy? I mean, I even brought good candy. Anyways, so it's a pretty interesting system. Is it, just like I did, it takes and throws out a little bit of food. See, he didn't clap, so he's not hungry. So we don't give him any more. Oh, there you go. He's the boss. So it throws a little bit of food, and then it listens to what's happening. And so you get this upswing in noise, and then as they consume that food, it comes down. And what's happening is basically their teeth are clapping together for the shrimp. So it's kind of like that. So when it comes back down, it gets down to some percentage of what it went up, and then it'll throw another feeding. And so it'll go throw another feeding, and then it listens to the response. The response is going down. So now the software says, hey, your response is not going up as fast as it went, and it's taking longer to go down. We're going to feed less. So here, this is the length of time that the spinner spun to feed food. So now it drops down, right? And it goes, here the response started to get stronger, so it started spinning up and fed more. So what this is doing, now it'll do this, and this is all controlled. It's all software. You change your settings. You have control of this. But it's making the choices based on how high this goes and how long it takes to set down. But you can control how long it'll go, and there's operating things. But you run for about an hour. So it feeds for about an hour, then the system, quote unquote, shuts down. And what you're doing is you're letting the shrimp clean up any feed that's remaining. You get back down to a new base level, and then what it's going to do is it throws out just a little bit of feed, and then it sees there's a response. So if there's no response, it's not going to feed. Okay? So what this is doing is testing on a continuous basis and adjusting itself based on the food consumption of the shrimp. So this is real-time management. This is giving exactly what the shrimp want based on that noise response. Okay? So it's a very interesting system. So we saw this in the industry, and so we brought it to my facility. I purchased it. This wasn't supported by AQ1. Actually, the soy guys supported a lot of this. But I brought it to the facility because we do a lot of feed management. I thought it was a very interesting process. So what I'm going to do is show you our last 3 years of production using this system. And so what we've tried to do is figure out why it works, demonstrate it. trying to learn of what's going on. So we do semi-intensive production. We've got, these are research ponds. They're only 10th hectare. They're small ponds. But we do everything the typical commercial producer would do, or at least a commercial producer in our areas. We'll nurse for about 2 weeks. We'll stock out our shrimp. We go through a full production cycle, okay? So this is all, using typical management styles within our system. And so 2016 was the first year that we brought this in. So we basically are learning the system. And what we did is we basically ran our hand feeding, which is twice a day. We then brought in 6 timer feeders, so very simple feeder. You just feed 6 times a day, which my graduate students won't do for some reason. And then we have the automatic feeder, which we ran only 12 hours during the day, but we let it feed whenever it wanted to. Now, this was the first time we ever used them, so we did put some restrictions on things. And we looked at, growth, and this has all been published. We also looked at water quality. One of the interesting things is that when you move to these automated systems, your water quality has a tendency to smooth out, okay? We didn't see any major improvements in water quality, but you can see that there's a little bit kind of smoother, I guess would be a description of what it is. So we run our ponds as they are lined ponds with soil put back in because we're basically in sandy clay. This is a state facility, so they can afford it. It's not my facility. I'm a guest there. We run nursery system. I run about a 2-week nursery system because I want to take any mortality from shipping in the nursery, not in the ponds. And so we do, you can call it a quarantine system, you can call it a nursery system, but we run about 2 weeks. So we bring in our PLs, and then we stock out about a 50 milligram animal, I think, typically. Our traditional, what we've been doing for the last probably 16 or 18 years while I've been there, is a 120-day production cycle, so about 16 weeks. We start off with a high-protein 40% crumble, small feed, and then transition to, within a couple weeks, to a 36% protein diet, and run the rest of the production cycle. Example, 2 of the 3 years, this is the diet that was used. It's an extruded diet. It's an open feed formulation that we developed a long time ago as an example. So you can see soybean meal, we have about 8% animal protein, corn gluten meal, and then basically the rest is your filler. We do make sure to it's a research diet, so extrusion conditions are not optimized, so we add a little bentonite to make sure it's going to sink. But basically it's produced commercially for us as an open formulation. So our first standard feeding protocol, that's twice a day, which is what Latin America does. Okay, that's standard protocol in Latin America. We have a pre-programmed feeding protocol that we use, and we've done lots of work that demonstrates it's very good. We've also done lots of examples where we've changed that feeding protocol and it doesn't improve our performance. But because everybody says, well, you didn't feed enough, so we went up 15%. So 2 feedings a day, 15% more. And then we had the 6 feedings per day, the same quantity here. And then we had the AQ1 running by itself, so it's automated. We've got lots of water quality data. There's an entire paper on it. It's pretty boring, but this is what you guys want to see. So here's 2 feedings per day and 15% more. Basically, we don't change things, and we've done this many times. I can go up in my amount of feed. I'm a very conservative feeder. This gives me the best performance. 6 feedings per day, so the same amount of food going from 2 to 6, we got a boost in performance. Okay, so just feeding more feedings is going to improve things. Okay. And then the AQ1, of course, beat us out by about 50%. And if you want to look at the production, this is at low density because we had PL issues that year. But production goes up, final weights go up. Of course, survivals are reasonable. Feed conversions 1-to-1, we're pretty good at that. Our production per pond, if you want to look at it in terms of feed input, AQ1 fed more. Right? It's doing more feedings, it's managing so that animals are growing faster. So 2017, again, what we're trying to do is demonstrate and transition to these acoustic and automatic feeding systems. So I don't believe anything if you do it once. I want to do it more than once. So we ran our standard feeding protocol once again. We ran our timer feeders, but we increased the amount of feed that we're giving. So what I'm doing is basically ramping up, or my description is, I'm taking my standard feeding protocol, which is no longer valid because now we know that we can get faster growth with more feedings. I got to ramp that up to a new call for automatic feeders. And so we're slowly ramping that up. And then we ran the acoustic system. This is our typical density that we would run is 38 per meter, which we're also not doing. And of course, I do all the work. Now these are the guys that did the work. Again, ran through our production system. I'm not going to talk about management, but basically we have standard operating procedures. And remember, this is all being done by students, and they've never done this before. So we have standard operating procedures, and they are supervised, but basically they're doing all the work. So again, 2 feedings per day, then we ramped up. So I'm using my traditional feeding as a reference, because I got to have a reference point. So I'll always refer to things as 115, 130, 145, 160, which is back to my 2 feedings per day. And then we ran the acoustic feeding system again. So just to show you data, this is, we ramp up, my ramping up of feeding, and what I did is I plotted, here's my 3 ponds that I've pre-programmed. This is all programmed, so I just do it in advance. And then this is 3 of my ponds that I plotted from the AQ1, just to show you that it's not feeding the same amount every day, okay? And then we put a plateau up here because we have an upper limit of how much feed that we thought we could apply to our ponds, and so I put upper limits, and we did hit those upper limits towards the end of production. Now, I want you to notice a couple things. My standard protocol has been a 120-day production cycle. We're now at a 90-day production cycle, okay? So I've taken 30 days off my production cycle by moving to these automatic feeding systems. So here's 2 feedings per day. We're now at 90, so we can get to a 20-gram shrimp. So that's pretty good growth rates. But with the AQ1, we're just over 30 grams in 90 days. Okay. So again, what we're doing is we're essentially ramping up what's going on. So we've got 115, 130%. So this last year, so here's our production, feed, yield, individual weights. Again, we got to 32 grams. This is 90 days. Feed conversions, a little bit higher feed conversion than the AQ1, but typically it's good. One of the things that people ask me about in terms of the AQ1 system, and I don't have an answer, but I do have an example, is whether or not it will respond to biomass changes. So this is an example of a pond. The AQ1, here's it running normally. We then had an algae die-off, right? So phytoplankton crashes, you have aeration problems, your DOs are low. Well, it didn't feed as much when the DOs were low. Then we had mechanical failure and we lost our aerator, so there was a mechanical failure. So we killed a bunch of shrimp. And then, so we shut the system off for a couple days, and then we turned the system back on, and we lost about 40% of the shrimp in that particular system, so we ended up with about 60% of the production. And it fed about 60% of what the rest is. So it looked to me like in the example where we've seen a mortality issue that it readjusted. Okay, so I think the system is pretty dynamic, and if you have some sort of issue that it will readjust. So this is last year's production data. Again, we're running the timer feeders. Our entire facility is now timer feeders. So we're not doing any hand feeding anymore. We've gone to all timer and acoustic feeding systems. Again, what I'm trying to do is ramp up to get a new feed curve essentially. So we're feeding at 130, 145, and 160% of what our standard calculation is. And then we ran the acoustic system. Now, we did not have a shortage of post larvae this year, but when we accelerate the growth rate of the shrimp, you accelerate the amount of food you have to put in. Right? Your water quality is determined not by biomass, it's determined by the quantity of food you put in. Okay? I have realistic limitations on what I can do in terms of aeration and my biological carrying capacity, or at least where I view it is. Okay? I may be wrong, but I think I know where we can do maximum. So what we did is we chose to stock only at 25 per meter. Okay? So I made that decision because I am now producing a shrimp that's growing faster and I'm producing more feed into the pond. I have to have aeration that'll maintain that. that quantity, okay? And I have real limitations on how much horsepower I can have running at my facility. Basically, my electrical lines coming in only carry about 15 horsepower per line of ponds. If I exceed that, I blow my breaker, and then everything's dead. So we drop back because I'm a big believer of trying to work within your biological capacity of whatever system you have, okay? We all want to push them, but the reality is when you overcommit to yourself, you're going to have problems. All right. Apparently that's the end of my presentation. I don't know why it's not going down. Anyways, we're stuck. Apparently we're supposed to think about it. All right, so this year, again, we ran with the open formulation, 25 per meter, 2-week nursery, stock our animals. So here's our data. So we start feeding with automatic feeders about 30 days. So we stock our post larvae, we ramp things up. And then we're feeding at, you know, anywhere from 130, 145, 160, or the AQ1 is managing itself. And you can see that our growth rates really are very similar here. You know, so basically what I'm saying to myself is, hey, you know, 130, 145, I can readjust my growths back here. Now I can back calculate it with the AQ1, but I want validation of stuff by hand feeding. Anyways, but when we get to here, you know, we've fallen off. The 130 and 145 is no longer adequate. The shrimp are outgrowing that quantity of feed. Our 160 actually stayed with us till, you know, about right here, and then it falls off, and then our AQ1 took it out. So what we can do with this is we have all the AQ1 data, we can back calculate feed curves, and we have all our standardized feeding, which we can overlay on top of each other to, again, create a new feed curve for automatic feeders that supports this faster growth. And again, you know, we're running 90 days where my old production used to be 120, and we're getting close. We're between 30 and 35 grams in 90 days in terms of growth. So here's our data. Again, as feed input goes up, and then the most feed is going to be put in by the AQ1, we get 26 to 32 grams, so our yields are, you know, this is very good yield for us at that particular density and that level of production. But we've almost, you got about 50% more with the AQ1. On a worldwide basis, if you look at performance with automatic feeders, on average, when I talk to people who have database that have been, you know, selling feeders and have large databases, there's about a 25% improvement in performance across the board. If you're going from 2 feedings a day to automatic feeders, you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. Here in Asia, it's not uncommon to feed 6 times a day, so you're not going to get as big an improvement. But you are going to get an improvement as you go to more feedings per day over a longer period of time. And I really think that the AQ1 system has lots of advantages. You know, if you look at this from a historic perspective, in terms of our facility, you know, this is what we used to do. It's a 120-day production cycle, 2 feedings per day. We're now at 90-day production cycle. And reality is, if I'm targeting a 20-some gram shrimp, I can now do a 60-day production cycle. So we've talked about doing 2 cycles per year because we can get to 20-plus grams in 60 days. And I view about 20-gram shrimp as the minimum. But by, you know, the key here is the feed is in the water for less time. You know, I showed you data that if you have the feed in the water for over an hour, you have reduction in performance. So I think part of the nutritional response is, number one, I have feed in the water less time. The other response is, if you look at, this is feed intake on shrimp over time. And so we basically just took feed and fed it to shrimp in an aquarium and measured consumption. You know, if you only got an hour, you're going to get about yay much feed in that animal. If you can put many feedings, well, your intake of feed goes up, okay? Shrimp are not a carnivore. They're not going out and eating large meals. They have a relatively small stomach. What they do is they go out and eat very small meals very frequently. So you have to have the feed there and over an extended period of time. Well, if it's there an extended period of time, it's leached. So the only way you can solve these two problems at the same time is go to some sort of automatic system, okay? Because you can put out very small quantities of feed very frequently. The way I describe this is you can either, if you're going to have a big party, let's say your daughter gets married or you're going to have a big celebration, you can have waiters, everybody sits down at tables, right? And you have a whole bunch of waiters bring the food to everybody. That's really expensive and takes a lot of people. Or you can have a buffet and say, hey guys, you get up, you go get the food when you want it, right? That's all you're doing with automatic feeders, is you're essentially creating a buffet line. And this, technology's been, I've seen it from the very intensive, 500 plus shrimp per cubic meter down to the 5 shrimp per cubic meter extensive system. So I've seen these technologies work in 5-hectare ponds, and I've seen them work in very small ponds. There are limitations to using sound as a management tool. There are things that interfere with it. There are certain aerators that will cause a signal that's on top of that, and you can't separate it out. When it rains hard, rain sounds a lot like that, okay? So there are things that will interfere with that. So for example, for the AQ1, if rain, and it's a certain type of rain, it has to have the right frequency. But if there's a signal that's confounding things, for the AQ1, they simply turn it over to a timer feeder, and they just use it as a timer feeder, and then they come back when you want, once that interference is gone. So there's ways around these things. But it's not a perfect system. There are things that interfere with them. I've seen them in a lot of different systems. I have yet to see it in a raceway style system. No one has yet put one in a raceway type style system that I know of. They were looking at that last year when I talked to some people, but I have yet to see it. So there are things that potentially interfere, but these are in the Asian style super intensive system all the way down to very extensive systems. So to me, if we're going to remain sustainable, if we're going to remain a producer of protein sources, we need to minimize our marine ingredients just because they're limited resources. And there's lots of ways, protein sources as well as lipids, I think we have lots of tools there that we can use. We need to maintain that our feed conversions are low, and that means we need to promote the use of natural productivity. These biofloc, whatever you want to call the intensive systems, they're essentially biofloc systems or mixotrophic systems or whatever, but they have natural productivity that those shrimp are using. As long as we allow them to utilize that, I think that's a good thing. We need to let them do that. So I don't like overfeeding because I want them to actually use that natural productivity. We also have, use of saltwater resources. No one else is using those resources. So for example, a lot of our coastal areas, you can't do traditional agriculture because it's salinized. So we can use that for marine fish production, or we can go offshore. So we have lots of different advantages. And I think that you're going to see the industry, you've already seen it in the salmonid industry, it's pretty much taken over, but I think you're going to see a movement of people towards these automated systems. And there's both good and bad things about moving towards automated systems. But there's lots of vendors out there now where you can integrate your entire business model into your biological responses, and your business model can all be integrated in these cloud-based systems. And I think that that's a nice management tool. To me, if I have somebody go out and feed an automatic, fill up the automatic feeders instead of going out there 4 times a day to hand feed, there's better things that they can do with their time than filling up, throwing feed by hand. During water quality, instead of walking around with a DO meter checking DO, have an automated system that records it so it's 24 hours a day so everything's turned on and turned off. Feeding into your financial system so you can make decisions based on growth rates. So I think that these automated systems and these integrated systems are interesting. And then it's also a good way to share information in terms of diseases and whatnot if you're in these groups and whatnot. So there's lots of interesting things going on. The automated systems are coming online. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions if you got questions. Again, I've seen these systems from very low density to very high density. And I think that they're a very good way to invest money.